All righty, good evening, everyone. My name is Daniel Baird. I'm an event facilitator here at McNally Robinson Booksellers. And before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are on Treaty 1 territory, and that the land on which we are gathered is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Aninilwak, Anishinaabe, Dakota, and Dene peoples, as well as the homeland of the Red River Métis. Additionally, McNally Robinson Booksellers itself rests on the land that was once occupied by the Métis community of Roostertown. And then we are, of course, gathered here today to celebrate the Winnipeg launch of 2 new poetry collections. Dismantling by Eve Joseph. Let's hear a round of applause for it. And Sightings by Patrick Friesen. Another round of applause. We are, of course, grateful to Anvil Press and CMU Press, respectively, for publishing these 2 collections and for making this evening a reality. So to give you a sense about how the evening will flow, immediately following my introduction for the speakers, we will fall into the reading portion, which will call up Eve and then Patrick, respectively. Following that, they'll be joined in conversation with our host, Sarah Ens, over here on the chairs. Another round of applause. And then at the very end, I'll come by again, just to simply review how the signing procedure will go. But that will be for later. For now, I do have the pleasure of introducing tonight's special guests. So your host, Sarah Ens, is a writer, editor, and book publicist based in Treaty 1 territory, Winnipeg, Manitoba. She's the author of The World is Mostly Sky and Flyway, which won the 2023 Relit Poetry Award. Eve Joseph lives and writes in the unceded traditional territories of the Algonquin peoples, known today as the Esquimalt and Sonis First Nation. Her first 2 books of poetry, The Startled Heart from Ulichan and the Secret Signature of Things from Brick, were both nominated for the Dorothy Livesay Award. In the Slender Margin from HarperCollins won the Hubert Evans Award for Nonfiction. Quarles from Anvil was nominated for the Dorothy Livesay Prize and the Relit Award and won the 2019 Griffin Poetry Prize. Patrick Friesen, the author of nearly 20 collections of poetry, including the influential The Shunning, adapted as a play and dance work, and Blasphemer's Wheel, the winner of the Manitoba Book of the Year Award and runner-up for the Milton Acorn People's Poetry Award. A Broken Bowl was shortlisted for the 1997 Governor General's Award for Poetry. With co-translator Per Grass, he was shortlisted for the Griffin Poetry Prize in 2016 for Freda Opus for Strings and Wind Instruments by Danish author Ulrika Journes. Patrick Friesen and Eve Joseph both live in Victoria. So please join me in welcoming our first reader, Eve Joseph.
How's that? We do live on an island. So today when it got windy out, I thought, uh-oh, the ferries are going to be canceled here. Not something you think of, I imagine, too often, but I really did. Thank you, McNally's, for hosting this. It is really, I think, one of the best places in Canada to read, in no small part because of the audience. And Sue Sorensen, thank you for all the organizing you've done, not just for Patrick, but for me. I really appreciate it. Daniel, thank you. Who else? Brian Kaufman and Karen Green, my publishers, and Karen is from Winnipeg, so they have that great connection. I will just a couple of things about the book. I wasn't going to say this, but I am. Marika Friesen is Patrick's daughter, our daughter, and she designed the cover. And when I looked at it, you know, you can look at this little boxes, little rain clouds. I thought, she has designed the interior of my brain. This is exactly what inside my head looks like. About the book, it's divided half into my post poems and half into a form called centos, a series of centos. The centos are an ancient form of poetry, whereby every line is from another poet. So it's it comes from the Latin word cento, which comes from the Greek, or the Latin term cento comes from the Greek word patchwork quilt, which I think is a really lovely way of seeing this poem. As you take something from somewhere else and it ends up as something else. So I'll just read. The hour before dawn. How many silences penetrate other silences? The monk with his vows, a violin at rest in its black case. Two of our late Prapsies, three, the falling snow, the mouth of one just dead. Not the dying of the death itself, the wide open hole of the moment. The breath gone from the lungs, yet still in the room. In one of your letters you wrote, silent as a tree falling asleep. Overly poetic, I thought. But still, I climbed out of the bedroom window that night to sit on the roof and watch them. Boulders, poplars, maples, the medicine trees, and the ones that once held a child swaying in their branches. Make no mistake, I saw them relax and their limbs and droop, settling into their dreams. The sturdiest amongst them are living coffins. Astrology. The sky changes as we orbit. Each night, the stars appear to move slightly west of where they were the night before. For $49, you can name a star after someone you love. I failed the memory test given to old people. When asked what 30 objects were on the tray, I recalled only the steak knives with deer antler handles. I asked my mother where she got them. I had a child when she said, a boy who understood the loneliness of astronauts and language. What I failed to look at fails to look back at me. This is the lesson I keep forgetting, the one that dogs me. We sleep beneath a celestial graveyard. My horoscope says I'm ambitious. I was born under a constellation of dull stars, a goat with a tail of a fish. That's Capricorn. Distractions. You invited a horse into the apartment, an old thoroughbred with a sway back. I didn't take it seriously at first, priding myself on not confusing a poem for something it isn't. Word by word you coaxed him in, and now it is my job to feed and curry your prodigious imagination. One day last week, I volunteered on the farm shearing sheep. Today, I picked dead bees like old poems. I've lost track of the ways I distract myself. Come, walk with me. It all comes down to kindness, consideration, the way a farmer, before slaughtering a spring lamb, will fold her ears down, gently, over her eyes. Superpowers. When I wasn't looking, the broken bowl repaired itself. The genie let himself out of the bottle. The tide retreated so far back I could see yesterday. In the interval when I looked away, the dog with 3 legs grew a 4th. I tested my new powers by blindfolding myself. Sure enough, overnight, Porn, Fellaine, and Jacob showed up like elves in the shoemaker's shop. And in the morning, the table was piled high with poems written on blue sheets of paper. Wow. I wondered how far I could take this. What would happen if I looked? This is the part where it can all go wrong, where the gift of the poem gets weighted down by craft. Take away the wind, and the clouds will have to roll themselves across the sky. Privilege. When I was a sailor on the MV Besaven, the waves swept me off the hatch. Another lifted me back. An albatross crisscross stitched its way behind us, opening and closing a seam in our wake. Gray and white terns signaled land on a landless horizon. It was Easter in Acajutla, and the boys in doorways were selling their sisters and sawdust floored bars with corrugated tin roofs. The street was lit by candlelight, and the sailors were getting drunk. One of the older men asked if I was for sale. In the parking lot on the edge of town, a Ferris wheel carried its cargo of souls in little buckets that slowed and swayed precariously at the top. It never occurred to me that I could be bought or sold. It had never entered my mind. First, when asked what poetry resides in their bodies, one poet says, from his feet to his mind. One says it lives in her hair, another in the pain that is his constant companion. The talk turns to rivers and how we carry them inside us. The Saskatchewan, the Capilano, the Red. Farmers in the Atacama Desert threw nets onto low-lying cloud to harvest water, tapping fog, drawing droplets from the mist. Nobody says that poetry resides in their heart. All are thirsty. They want to haul the sky to earth. They want to be fishermen who find horses at sea. Tinnitus. It's one of life's great strokes of luck to land a good mother. One who transforms into a butterfly in the water, and whose dripping wings cause the roses in the garden to bloom. Strindberg heard crickets under his pillow, singing in his pillow. Unlike touch, hearing doesn't need a surface. When the dying can no longer speak, they begin to sing. They ride their voices to old haunts and disguise themselves as a series of chirps and whistles. My doctor says it's tinnitus, but that's because she's never stood in the field on a summer night. The lucky ones say they chose him before they were born. The sad ones understand the distance between 2 points has nothing to do with the shortest path. I nestle deeper into the pillow, listening for crickets, hearing her. And I'll read a few of the centos. After what I did for about a year is I went to libraries and I had a stack of books, just went to poetry shelves, took all the poetry books off the shelf. They were beside me, and I wasn't reading poems, I was simply looking for lines I loved. The thing was just a line that stood out. And as I began to write them, I began to think of these, square little boxes, as, when someone asks me the question, who would you invite if you could invite anybody to a dinner party who's living or dead? And that's each one became a dinner party for me. They were such a pleasure. I said to my nephew, these are a real pleasure to write. And he said to me, well, Auntie, you're cooking with good ingredients. Central one. The shades above the city have already been drawn. The pockets of wind emptied. The room is quiet now, everything falling at the same rate of speed. In the hush, your heart sounds like a black cricket. There is somewhere in our lives a great unsolved love. Maybe one morning, walking in dry, glassy air, I'll turn and see the miracle occur. There are angels, brawny as farmhands, working wonders, but not miracles. There are hands fluttering between the constellations, trying to hold on. It's a wonder that anything gets done. The swans are gone. Still, the river remembers how white they were. Section 3. About semantics. Too much has been made of the difference between mourning and melancholia. Not everything breaks, needs to be repaired or replaced. Everyone sees visions. You too, but no one admits to it. I hear the books in all the rooms breathing calmly. I know not these hands, and yet I think there was a woman like me once, had hands like these. A blink of an eye, and all things pass. Here's something I've learned. The more birds, the more likely they will leave a tree at the same moment. Centum 7. Close attention to things makes them strange. Wind hoots in the chimney like a child blowing in a bottle. Happy. In a glass of a wave, a painted fish. The late dawn sneaks in, polishes the dark spots clean. How, I wonder, do people do it? Match the words coming out of their mouths with the expressions on their faces. As you grow older, you begin to enter the world of myth. You become less a fact and more a legend. Are you with me? Are you following along? A far flash inside a cloud, boiling in the night sky for a moment. Seraphic. In my head, a bee is speaking. I should Google the myth of Sisyphus, and while I'm at it, the myth of this, and the myth of that. And one last sentence. Sentence 21. All the new thinking is about loss. In this, it resembles all the old thinking. You prepare for one sorrow, but another comes. The god of war is drunk with blood. Yesterday, my dreams took the night train, and I did not know how to say goodbye to them. It's only when we lie down that our shadows fit. To see them, one must not be looking. I forget myself in the sneezing of daylight. Write 4 lines, pretend it's a poem, that tomorrow will be nothing of the kind. In the meantime, try to remember, and try to forget. Like I said to the doorman the other night, some moon, huh?
My mixed bag. A few different things first. I want to acknowledge Alec, Daniel, Professor Sarah, for taking part in this, especially for CMU Press and Sue Sorensen, who's been a brilliant publisher. And I'd like to recall Dorothy Livesay, as I call it, of course, in Libsyn. Exactly 50 years ago, she got me published. I don't know if I be published even now if she hadn't done it. I want to remember a few people. Les Brent, visual artist and a friend. You'll probably know him. Agatha Dick, also a visual artist. And Patrick O'Connell, this is many years ago. Patrick was a good friend, and I'll read it very brief. I think this was the last page of Eggers, one of those typical Patrick titles, fragments and not. Because I've had a sparrow's trust, I have endured it all, with my wishbones for stumbling cities, my repertoire for beggars. And now that the clapperless bell has rung, it's time to follow the bee. More things fall from heaven than rain. So today, as I go through Lilac Town, I salute the sun and let the cricket in my mandolin have its own sleep. Stereotypical Patrick. You were perfect. Not perfect, no doubt. Very 14, 15, 16 months ago. If you tried anything wrong, it didn't work. It's too short. And the other person who passed just recently, Victor Ens, who will be having a launch of his Totus book later this month, I think. A week from today. And where's it at? Where the Writers Guild used to be. Yeah. The day before he died, he sent me a new poem, and he knew quick. I always respected that, but he knew quick. He kept going. Sometimes the poems were terrible, sometimes they were brilliant. They were all on the map, but he kept doing it. And I think this is the last poem in his Totus book, which he sent me. Very brief shadow tag. I am not strong. I am weak. I'm alive with love in his valley of apples, cherries, pears, peaches, and sister, my brother, and me, the shadow tag. The grinning reaper lifts their skirts, racing to play, catches my brother dead to last. Henry. The noise of relentless contact with the world. That nightmare of data without the tenderness of silence or whispers. Pay attention. Claxons of relief. Nowhere is timeless. Deep in the interstellar travel of dreams, there are whimpers and cries. A lonely, mad species navigating through sense and thought. It's the same. Falling in love with sweet nothings on a wind foam, or a fox crossing a field in its wild, moping presence. An invisible song waking trees at sunrise. Some desert traveler said nothing was written in sea or sand. He was wandering on foot and in mind. Long, he said, he would want at the oars. Wise and beauty. It's been a long year of brutality and shameful words. Breathe for carnage, extinction. As we arrived at a time when the car home in the night brings terror, do we remember each person beneath the bombs, each person we did not meet? How often the world has been obliterated. With each death, it vanishes. Cinderella with her slipper, a shifting tide, stars, magic fruit from a green radio, all of it. And reserves are carried. The wheels of verses roll, and the world falls away. Rehearsals are over. Never turn fatal. And you have not wasted time enough, not taken in enough earthly. But there was a day when someone whistling, I caught a challenged glimpse. That was before I fell into words, before lies, and the possible difference between them. Darkness. The body, beautiful, is eternal, as long as the ghost lives. And who has not seen a beautiful body? And who cannot love? Who cannot reach for the other, longing for the unfamiliar, that hand, that mouth, alive in the bewilderment of matter, finding a way to love mortality, mulling the darkness of matter, like orgasm at 3 a.m., bodies beneath the white duvet, as if they were buried in snow, brilliant white snow on the moon. And then all flesh and hair and nails, and losing themselves in the soil of each other, seated in the darkness, in the depths of death, rapture and separation. And then I have reached for the lamp. Read this one for Sue, like Bogman. First time reading Bogman. Where are they? Bogman were in Ireland and then in Denmark. The mirror is wearing gravity's mask. It's always there, invisible. It slowly through decades fashioned itself to your face. But that it holds, there's also a restless ecstasy, this moment of time, and carrying it to an end, a Bogman in some kind of infinity. Flare of astonishment among the tactics of survival. A tuna sandwich, a job, all the dysfunctions of the species. And the greatest of inventions, love. And underground, a cello is grinding its lowest note. The machine of earth. Your feet feel the vibration as you find your way on a fool's journey, walking sometimes through the alphabet of trees, and drawing the hanged man from the pack, and someone banging sticks together, or palms on riverboard, with a passive heart, of something hidden, an elation of a dance, a breath gone raspy, and then a cry. How can one live without drums? Clap of hands, return to the earth, and falling into the arms of a name. Oh, the moon is a cold stiletto blade that entered the womb and cut you. Questionable evidence. A green thought, a red one. Quicksilver thinking. Course changes of drums, connecting, disconnecting, sideways, parallel, and no words to deliver any of it. Me, without a Shakespearean vocabulary. Far from it. That facility to bend, appropriate, ultimately to translate. The weird work of associations, trying to slow them down, trying to shift them into some kind of order without damage. Simply unease. Sitting in the green shade, getting up to walk on the way into the language, trying to find a way to say new again, the same old, but vivid to say, all that motion, the chemistry of it, and nothing comes together. The static of the radio on a passing tug, see a man at the wheel, and the water, as usual, the water seeps into me, but I can't fathom it. Ideas flowing out of some hidden folds of the brain, unconnected, unworked, lost. That particular collision and commingling, irretrievable. And the thinking disappears, as does the man. And few labored words that come, these words, leaving only questionable evidence. Any of you read Kessler, Arthur Kessler? He was caught in the Spanish Civil War and was going to be executed. Spent the last night in a room, small window looking up in the mountains. And this is part of the third section of my book, which is called homages, which are homages to various artists for their work or for their personality that had an effect on me, one way or the other. And sometimes it led to suddenly the name disappeared and I had my own poem. Other times you'll hear the titles or something from the work. Anyways, this is called Kessler's Window, that last window before he thought he'd get to it. It's what we're all born to, Kessler's Window, the Spanish courtyard, and the unredeemed mathematics of death. The telephone ringing at the end of the hall, with its lonely alphabet waiting to come together as a sentence. And history doesn't matter, nor prophecy, only the window with its flagrant and insufferable possibilities. You wake from what you can't possibly remember, from before your birth, from that awful, ungodly slumber. The wars go on and on. A kind of species zelps the mort, with all that righteousness and anguish. We're waking back into the deepest sleep of rivers, and all you've forgotten carried in that current. The window is open, staring in at your rumbled sheets and gazing out at the stained mountains. Telephone dangles black and stiff from the wall. A garbled voice landing amongst the dying footfalls. Beneath the sill, the dog circles the soil of its sleep, settling with a sigh on the closed red tulips. Neil Young. Even I ran in almost into Neil Young. In the Big Sur, we were looking for a restaurant, Beaches. Finally found it, came in one spot for parking, a very narrow spot. And I noticed the car, one of the cars beside it was a 1955 or 56 Oldsmobile Buick, an old car. I saw that, and I saw the back of a lanky guy with long hair. And I knew who it was. It was Neil Young collects old cars. He had something like 60 of them in a barn somewhere. So I called out to him. All I said to him was, turned with a huge smile. I didn't want to bother. I call out a greeting to the old man of Big Sur, and he answers with, "Hello, Winnipeg." Well, that's a story to keep in mind. Did he skip stones across the assembly line? Kind of eternity straddling earth from long before the bulls of last God to long after the future. Comes a time for a skinny-legged kid to find his way around community clubs and dance halls, finding his way into the eye of the hurricane. That long, hard way through vocations and discoveries in the shape of spirit, all the way to Big Sur in a parking lot of beaches, lanky and turning with the rain. Marsh, this one, blood oranges. Always a black dress in the closet, and a bowl of blood oranges on the counter. There is a symmetry, Joseph builds, with deliberation, with the clutter of words, aware that something may be hurtling toward her like a seraphic train blowing through the station. Eve of lost ancestors, indomitable, even in the biggest house of her father's dying. In a room, no rituals, only the gesture of her hand on his reconciled hand. Daughter's birthright, a moment of familiarity at last. Leaving the house to walk along a dirt road, stopping at a field for the horses at the fence, her ears tilted toward her soul. Middle section prose poems. But it had something to do with my friend Patrick Friesen, from Stein. You were laughing. You were laughing, and it was a bad to us. And sang for a moment on the steps, the night around us. Slowly learned that I am something less than a poppy, a mortgage, a wedding. And fastened myself on the street, stopping now and then to watch the species dance, finding out the song doesn't matter, only the sound, like a song. This is written about when my mother was entering dementia. There is anguish in light. I'm drunk, she said, and we never touched a drop. How else would you explain this broken mind? But you remembered an eclipse of the sun, 1863. No, July 1963. That was when her firstborn disappeared. Deer are difficult to spot when they're lying in tall brown grass. They're very good at not being where they are. They wait. So her ear twitches. Trains used to whistle. What's that? Feels like a float plane, she said, trying to rise from the water. Leave things behind. Sorrow, for one. There were such, she said. A free man. You can't catch Leviathan with a hook. You just Row the boat quietly into a bay and wait as Leviathan dreams you. You caught perch and once a walleye. Letters to the world, and. This is a dream word you live with, and this and that. But you have never tried to catch a whale with a worm. You're an old man now, walking naked through the house, talking to yourself with a gurgling radiance, alive and sounding. You will die a free man, your hands raw with hope.
Well, I'm really honored to be here this evening with two of Canada's best poets. I've long admired both of your work. And Patrick, I'm told that you used to host parties here in Winnipeg that my parents attended. So there's that. Congratulations to both of you on these really extraordinary collections. In Sightings, Patrick, you write that music holds immense vocabularies, vibrations of the universe. And as we all just heard, these two collections are filled with music. It's such a pleasure to read these poems, to be immersed in and moved by language so playful and haunting and strange and true. So my first question is about how this is a bit of a homecoming for you, Patrick, and the two of you read in Steinbach last night. And I'm just curious about how was that?
It was quite fine. It was in a public house. It didn't exist in Canada. Interesting audience, half of whom knew by face but couldn't remember their names. And most interesting, several people who had never heard poetry in their life. I wanted to come back for to hear about. So that was a success story.
Yeah, absolutely.
One guy stayed with us for 20 minutes after. We read today, very receptive audience.
Confident is family.
That's the half I didn't know. All four of my siblings were there, shocked. Shocked at the two of them. They came, some frowned at certain poems, others laughed. Sibling relationships. What else was there about the weekend itself?
Well, what surprised me, maybe I knew it intellectually, I didn't know it emotionally, was how your work is of this place. It felt like it just felt different than hearing it on the coast. There was a place for it, there was a ground for it, a reception for it, and I was really moved by it. It was wonderful. It felt like a privilege to be able to hear that.
It also felt like a farewell. My age. Down the valley. So it's kind of saying goodbye to the town.
You mentioned in your readings, both of you, that your collections incorporate a few different forms of poetry, and both of your collections have prose poems. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what that form allows for or invites in, or why you're both drawn to that particular form.
She's the better prose poet.
Better place. I love the form. I love there's a little introduction. I don't usually do introductions. There's a little introduction in this book, and it talks about the collision of prose and poetry. Charles Simic called it a collision, and I love that collision. It's not something that is gently put together. You're working on on verse. There's something that's powerful. I had a stroke in 2013, was it? Yeah, 2013. And I have not been able to write in line. I just can't. Sounds funny. It doesn't work. When I say I can't, anyone can write, but it doesn't work. But the prose poem, when I said in the introduction, is it feels like I'm tricking my brain into it's thinking I'm writing prose, but really I'm writing poetry. So it's just a form, it's a form. It's a form where you can play. I love it comes out of surrealism. It comes out of the French surrealists, and it just allows you to play with language. It also allows you to make lots of leaps and associations. And I've never been a narrative poet. I love the way my first book was about the ghazals. I made it by association, and that the prose poem feels very much like a ghazal to me.
Conclusion of narrative and image. So,
I have a question actually about, you're talking about surreal, or what putting associations together and moving by image to kind of create this strangeness. And I think that both of these collections do a wonderfully transformative thing where they defamiliarize familiar experiences, and they kind of infuse the ordinary with the surreal. And I was delighted by the element of surprise in a number of the poems. For example, in Dismantling, there's a poem about childhood memories, and a spider's nest shows up in a woman's hairdo. And Patrick, in Sightings, you write about being wrenched once more out of familiarity and into the mystery of desire. So I'm interested in the way that you both use sound and image to create that surprise. And I'm curious about how those moments of surprise come about. Do you surprise yourself?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
One of the tenets, one of the things that when I started reading about poetry was Robert Frost saying, "No surprise in the writer, no surprise in the reader." And it's surprising the writer you're surprised by. And that's so wonderful when it happens. When it doesn't work, there's no surprise.
in a good way, surprises and their work.
And also, Sarah, what when you talk about the surreal becoming the ordinary surreal, the image in that poem of a woman who had a spider's nest in her beehive was my mom had a hairdressing salon, and that happened. What you do with that, yeah. It shocked me as a kid, let me tell you. But that's real, so you can take those things that sound like they're just made up, but they're not. They're not items.
Yeah, and I guess I'm interested too in how you select those memories, those moments of attention. Eve, you have a line in this book that goes, "In a polite gesture, rain drips through trees, tipping the leaves like an old man doffing his hat." And I think that's such a precise, perfect simile. It forces, or it makes you see something that's ordinary and everyday, and it makes you see it differently. And both of these books have small moments like that: walks along the harbor, brushing your teeth, the dog sleeping in the garden. Patrick, you read in that last poem. These small moments, or as you also wrote, Patrick, only the hem of a moment that become surreal or offer these flashes of insight because of the poetic attention that you give them. So I'm interested in what these poems say about the act of attention. Both of you also write about the noise of relentless contact with the world, the nightmare of data. You said that in the first poem you read, Patrick, and you say, I miss the early days of poetry when the world spoke to me, when the quality of attention was more important than the poem itself. So what is it that draws your attention when you're sitting down to write a poem, or what sits you down to write a poem and helps you enter into that receptivity that's required by poetry?
Same quality of attention and pay attention. Are two different things.
Yeah.
Quality of attention is slow. Pay attention is typically authoritarian. Politicians like to say either listen or now see or something like that. Misusing our senses, really. They're just saying, really, I'm the expert, listen to me. And the quality of attention he's talking about is taking your time. In my case, I like to write late, rarely right before midnight, because that's when I get sleepy. And that allows me to find surprises. I'm not editing myself. Up till then, I'm editing myself. But after that, I'm just a little exhausted, and I start, and come on, do this. Next thing I know, I'm going the direction I hadn't planned.
That totally does not work for me.
Much more precise for.
No, I'm sleepy. Don Mackay, by the way, was in Gary Getty's Poetics. Nobody's doing it, it's like 20th century poetics. And Don Mackay is the one who said the quality of attention was probably more important to him than the poem itself. I remember that from years ago. The image that I remember that image when I came to poetry in my late 40s, and I remember I went to this workshop, Patrick Friesen workshop, and I hadn't been able to write. Everyone had left the room, and I just watched. I watched this tree. I was so damn determined to try and describe something that I just watched the rain. It probably an hour. I watched the rain fall on the leaf, and finally it did look like an old man doffing his hat.
Yeah.
It was that I had that. I don't have that anymore. That kind of dogged determination to name things. But that's where that came from. I remember it really well.
She said seashore once, trying to come up with the words for sound of the water.
There's still time. So the two of you are married, and you have these books out at the same time, and you're touring them together. And you both credit the other in your acknowledgements for helping each other edit. And I just want to hear a little bit about what it's like to write and edit alongside each other.
He was known among her friends as Attila the Edit.
He's so gentle. He's so light and everything. We're different. I'm not that bad.
But the way it works is she's at the end of the hall. She still insists on saying here or something I can't hear. But sometimes we meet to read what we're writing, but it's too dangerous for something unfinished.
We're very different writers. Patrick reads everything out loud. Music informs Patrick. Music informs your work. It's different for me. I wish it did. The language informs my work. There's a precision. It's the same as that image, trying to find that image. But this, we're careful. It's not that we're careful with each other. But you said it last night. We recognize where the work comes from. It isn't when Patrick edits me, it isn't what he thinks he wants. It's what he knows of me. And
Whether it's actually doing what she
exactly.
Reading, I first learned that from Derek. Here, Herb Rask, are you watching? Herb Rask taught me that he was a brilliant editor when I replaced 18 years ago. And I wondered how he did did this, and he was looking through my eyes at my own work. Yeah, check. And he could point out what didn't work, what did work, maybe. That way. And I think that's the job of an editor.
Well, sounds like a dream team. Lucky to have a good editor in your house.
Yeah.
So I think we can open it up to audience questions, or questions from the room, questions from, if you're watching from home, like YouTube. I have more too.
There's one there. The gentleman there.
Yes.
I'm very impressed with this report. I'm suddenly thinking about these samples. When I understood correctly, more than one line, then you take from that poem and poet line, and you have 4 books, and you at London, and when you made a decision, you have to have that authorized by that board.
All really good
And how
questions.
is your mind? Isn't that a product of dissociation of it?
You really got it. All those are the heart of the questions around centers, all of those things. So, I didn't start writing until I had probably 300 lines, so that maybe 250 lines, so that it wasn't that I had a small, it wasn't that I found one line and loved it and tried to find it. I needed to, just be able to go through them. And the process was amazing in that I started by trying to get lines that worked, and then I just let go of that. And the poems, it sounds la-di-da, but the poems, literally, the lines found themselves. I could not say that Patrick Friesen, although there's a design, and there's a design in these poems, and it surprises me how, if one has a voice, how they sound like my own voice to me. They sound like poems I could have written. And yeah, permissions, you have to, I wrote to as many living poets all over the world as I could. Made some wonderful connections. Last week, the book was out, but someone had read it, and he wrote to me about Thomas Tranströmer, the Swedish poet who won the Nobel Prize. He's the late Tranströmer, who's a poet I absolutely loved. Well, that's what I'm getting it slightly wrong. Sorry. It was in chorals, and there was a poem that named the town that Tranströmer was from, and we had this wonderful conversation about him. I'm also now going to use a line in another cento for this man. But I think I have so much emotion around this. I'm stumbling a little bit. But I'll tell you one story that feels a little bit miraculous to me in this process of finding these poets and these people. In the libraries, I kept coming across lines by a poet called Tom Hannon, an American poet. I'd never heard of him before, but I was surprised. I would see a line and I would see it was from him. So you would try to go through, people have websites, or if you didn't have websites, I'd go through publishers, or universities. You just keep trying to track people down. And so I wrote to a publisher because there was no website. And the publisher said that this gentleman, that Tom Hannon, was in care. He was in a care home, and that he would send this to the publisher would forward it to his daughter, which he did, and she wrote back to him, and she said that her dad was not really verbal anymore. He had quite a strong tremor. She said, "I'm going to take it to him anyway." He was a poet. He lived his whole life, she said, was poetry. He lived and breathed poetry. So she did. She went to the care home. She sat with him, And she asked, she read out the request to use his lines. She read the lines, and his tremor, she said, stop for a moment. He looked at her and he said, I think that's a good idea. And then he was gone again. It almost sounds like I made that up. I didn't. And when I worked at hospitals for many years, I would find, sometimes when the dying couldn't speak anymore, people would sing, or there would be other ways. So, and what his daughter and I talked about was that poetry was a language so deep inside him that it could speak for a moment for him. So, this kind of miraculous things have happened. Thank you for your question.
I heard Rudy Weep speak once, and he said when he got his PhD, his professor asked him, what was he going to be focusing on? And he said, Shakespeare. And the prof said, well, that's good, but there's a lot of other Shakespeare writers. He said, you're a Mennonite, aren't you? I've never heard of a Mennonite writer. You have a Mennonite sounding name. You spoke about Steinbach. When you started writing, I imagine the number of Mennonite writers who identified were a lot different. That field has expanded. And I'm wondering if you could say something about your contribution to that expansion and that development, and also your observations, and also how is that a heritage that's still deeply integrated within you? That's something you were talking about, farewell. You're living out on the West Coast, as I understand it. If you can say something about that, because the contribution
all
has
the
been
other
so-
men that language are terrible. They haven't learned a damn thing. The only Mennonite writer I was aware of when I was a teenager was Rudy Weep. He didn't write poetry. So he didn't have an influence directly that way. I was aware of him, and so that was, and there was some kind of a scandal around it. Maurice, you probably know about this. What was it about? Remember?
Yeah.
You got into trouble.
This heritage wasn't perfectly represented at all times. Me,
Yeah,
but we don't.
yeah. And that, I thought, oh, good. There's another one that's resisting something. And there's lots of them. They're not short story writers, novels, very, very, very good ones. I don't know, I'm writing this about Mennonite things, but I never thought of myself as a Mennonite writer. It happens to come from this background. You wouldn't ask, no one would have asked what Wordsworth was like in English book. Except, of course, there's a lie I'm telling you, because the first language wasn't English. It was Low German, Hot Deutsch. We never learned that language very well because my parents, once I went to kindergarten, wouldn't speak the language in front. They speak English, so I would adapt to the reality of English world. So I lost any ability, except for certain things like the vowel sounds. Go to the end of the duck, the ducks are swimming. Or, my father is lots of the boss nights. Stuff like that I loved hearing. Many years later, I became interested in assonance, because assonance is a similar sound vowels. So the vowel has always been, I'm really wrong. Vowel has always been most important for me in my writing, more than alliteration ever was. Alliteration always seemed too easy. Had to be sort of separate, but you can have alliteration like really long. In the middle of words. Doesn't have to be the beginning, that's when it becomes always. But that has nothing to do with coming from my background. I don't know what to say about that. The business. When I was young, one writer to be was a historian, non-fictional writer. But my mother He studied poetry to me all the time, if you remember from her high school days. Robert Frost is on her gravestone. So there was that deep influence which had nothing to do with being a man. It's that personality. That person. Yeah.
Question about that. When you started writing, and I ask this because I'm curious about it, and I think that we talk about this, I think that your Mennonite background is, it fused through all your work. Yeah, so in terms of resistance, in terms of, it just feels like, it's just woven, but it's partly, connected to coming home here.
What was it yesterday that you heard that struck you? That it was from that town, from that person. Language, my word choices, my words, what?
This place, it was that there was a recognition in that place of your language, your spirit, and what you were.
Thanks.
It is 8:02, so we should probably proceed to the signing. I'll just say, as a Mennonite poet myself, that Patrick, one thing that your work has done is certainly that resistance has made it feel possible for more poets to write from the East Reserve over there. So.
What I said yesterday that someone took to heart apparently was, I didn't belong, so they couldn't show me. They couldn't hurt me. I didn't belong. And that isn't just me, I think. That would be good for a lot of poets. Don't belong to one literary theory or whatever. Then they can trash you.
For those of us who were in the poetry scene and the writing scene in those years, when you were, I don't know if you were starting out or established.
Talking with the 70s or 80s? Or...
Yeah, the 80s, Robert Roach's class. There were so many fabulous Mennonite writers, and you were one of them.
Yeah.
Although I was never in his class. Yeah.
And Pete's feeling, I just feeling of his groundedness here.
Yeah.
I feel that too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Coming on right quick.
Yeah.
I just have to add a little note to this because when I was an undergraduate at the University of Winnipeg, there was a new course called Mennonite Literature. And forgive me, I can't remember his name, wonderful professor. And anyway, so he taught us, history of Mennonite literature going back to Europe and all of this and why literature was not from the Mennonites and all this. But anyway, the whole thing leads up to basically Patrick Friesen. And it was wonderful, but yes, he was so proud of you, and you were sort of a culmination of all of this. So I just thought I would add to that.
I think that question had to be answered by others. And I think that's why why Patrick stumbled up here. Because you can't say what you put, what your contribution's been. It has to be someone else saying it.
Well, those of us who were on the outside looking in, we just saw this exceptional ability.
Of the Mennonite brothers you're talking
Lovely. I do think this is a fantastic way.
Can I add?
Yes, but yes, we'll do one more.
We had a rich background of hymns, biblical literature, language, and the St. James Bible. Aside from the context, it's the sound, which is Shakespearean English, essentially, right? And if you have that, and then they open the door, which used to be there that you can't do this. door opens a bit. Whew. I'm running out with all these rhythms and certain approaches to language. The Germanic approach, for example, you know that English is, to simplify, is probably half Germanic and the other half is Latin, like Italian, all these Mediterranean languages. But the German part, the Germanic part of English is down to earth, physical. It's not words like library or justice or those kind of words. They're abstract. The Mediterranean words we've adapted tend to be towards the abstract. The Germanic is very physical. And that's where image comes from. So I would say we have that advantage right off. So,
No, that's fantastic. That is a fantastic way to end the night. Let's give a round of applause for everybody over here. We'll be done the signing portion of the evening, which will of course take place at the table here to my right. Please feel free to have a copy of your book signed before you visit the cash desk, so you can get it signed. So long as you pay for it before you leave is what makes me happy. A big round of thank you to everybody here, both in person and online. Let's give yourselves a round of applause. And thank you again to Anvil Press and CMU Press for making this evening a reality again. Give another big round of applause to our host, Sarah Ens. And again to Joseph and Patrick Friesen. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a lovely night.